I'm Nancy Cavey, National ERISA and Individual Disability Attorney. Welcome to Winning Isn't Easy. Before we get started, I've got to give you a legal disclaimer. The Florida Bar Association says I have to tell you that this isn't legal advice, but nothing will ever prevent me from giving you easy to understand information and an overview of the disability insurance world, the games that carriers play, and what you need to know to get the disability benefits you deserve. So off we go. Do you have ME/CFS syndrome? If so, today's podcast is for you. If not, I still think there are lessons that you can learn from this podcast. Today, I'm going to talk about 4 things. The first thing is going to be ME/CFS syndrome and the 8 common reasons why ME/CFS claims get denied. 2, evidence, examinations, and carrier reactions to ME/CFS syndrome, part 1. Evidence, examinations, carrier reactions to ME/CFS fatigue syndrome, part 2. And in conclusion, ME/CFS and its relationship to COVID-19 disability claims. We've got a lot to cover, but before we do that, we're going to take a quick break.
Have you been robbed of your peace of mind from your disability insurance carrier? You owe it to yourself to get a copy of Robbed of Your Peace of Mind, which provides you with everything you need to know about the long-term disability claim process. Request your free copy of the book at caveylaw.com today.
Welcome back to Winning Isn't Easy. Ready to get started? Let's first talk about ME/CFS and the 8 common reasons why these claims get denied. But before we get started, I think we need to understand what the disease is and its symptoms. ME, which is also known as chronic fatigue syndrome, is, according to the Mayo Clinic, a disease characterized by profound fatigue, sleep abnormalities, pain, and other symptoms that are made worse by exertion. It occurs more commonly in women, and unfortunately the cause of this condition is unknown, but it can include environmental and genetic factors. Now, one of the characteristic symptoms of ME/CFS is fatigue over 6 months, and that fatigue often worsens with activity, but it doesn't improve with rest. There are, according to the Mayo Clinic, over 200,000 cases reported each year. Now, I'm going to be discussing how the chronic enterovirus infection, or CE, is possibly connected to ME/CFS. According to Meopedia, though normally only capable of acute infections under certain conditions, these enteroviruses can create chronic infections. And the ongoing enterovirus infections can be found in ME/CFS cases and even several other chronic illnesses, including dilated cardiomyopathy and type 1 diabetes. Now, we need to also understand that the disability carriers don't understand these enteroviruses, much less the ME/CFS. And that can complicate a disability insurance claim and the carrier's approval of a claim. So let's talk about the 8 reasons that disability carriers will use to justify a claim denial of ME/CFS claims or even chronic enterovirus infection claims. The disability insurance companies, like First Unum, have a laundry list of defenses they'll commonly raise in a disability insurance claim regarding CFS, chronic enteral infections, and myalgic encephalomyelitis. They'll employ medical peer review providers to create these defenses. I call these medical providers liar for hires. There's big money to be made by providing these medical opinions, and big money made and saved by disability carriers. They no longer have to pay your disability benefits. So the role of the medical peer review provider is important for you to understand, because these are the people who are going to create the reasons that will justify the claims denial. They're hoping at some point that your treating physician won't support your claim, or they'll get tired of filling out forms or tired of being harassed by the disability insurance company. And when that doesn't work, or when the disability of definition of disability changes, or when the carrier is just flat out tired of paying your claim, the games will begin. And so what they'll do is they're going to assign a nurse case manager or a peer review physician to determine your quote unquote correct restrictions and limitations so that they can justify a denial of your benefits. The medical provider is either an on-site physician employed by the disability carrier, known as a medical director, or there are medical providers who have signed up with disability review companies to do medical reviews to supplement their income. Either way, these doctors are generally nothing more than hired guns. And that's why I call them liar for hire medical peer review providers. Now, it's common for the hired gun to contact your physician and seek a better understanding of their medical opinions, which is a code word for we want to convince you that your opinion's wrong, or that you have no justification for your opinion, and that our opinion regarding your restrictions and limitations are really correct, doctor, right? Now, obviously, the whole purpose of this is to ultimately create evidence, in quotes, to establish that you're capable of working. All right, so now we've laid the base for this. We understand what ME/CFS is. We understand how the disability carriers are going to use these liar for hire doctors. So what are the 8 common reasons for the claims denial? Denial number 1 is there's no objective evidence of the diagnosis. They're, of course, going to say it's all in your head, or it's something you're making up, or you just could not be in as much pain as you complain of. Now, physicians will routinely rely on the complaints of patients in rendering opinions regarding the diagnosis and restrictions. And what they're going to be arguing, the disability carrier is going to be arguing, is that objective evidence is medically necessary in every case. And that can be difficult, if not impossible, to prove in cases like CFS, fibromyalgia, migraines, or even mental health impairments. There generally isn't objective evidence to confirm these conditions. But the good news, at least, is that courts across the country have repeatedly criticized and reversed denials based on a claimed lack of objective basis of the diagnosis. Denial reason number 2. There's no objective evidence for the restrictions and limitations assigned by the treating physician, or your doctor is improperly relying on your subjective complaints. This is a defense that has some traction with some courts. They want to see an objective basis for the restrictions and limitations assigned by your doctor. Now, because courts do uphold denials based on this argument, I think as a matter of proof, you get what's called a functional capacity evaluation, a cardiopulmonary exercise test, or a comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation. The courts will recognize these tests as an objective basis for the assignment of restrictions and limitations. All right, denial reason number 3. There is no correlation between the findings to substantiate your reported complaints. So in other words, the medical reviewer is going to criticize the treating physician's records on the basis that there's an absence of correlating findings or studies that will substantiate your reported complaints or the level of your reported complaints. And often to get there, the medical reviewer will cherry pick the medical records and ignore objective findings that explain or are consistent with the disabling symptoms. Denial reason number 4, an absence of functional impairment. Now, that reason always amazes me, because if you look at the disability policy, do you see functional impairment as a definition of disability? Rarely. Do you see a definition of impairment, much less functional impairment? You won't see either of those words used in a disability insurance policy. And the worst thing, I think, is that the peer review doctor doesn't even define what they think functional impairment is, or the standard that they use to determine whether or not there is a functional impairment. I think that's a bogus reason for denial, but it's a common one. All right, denial reason 5, unremarkable lab findings or diagnostic studies. Now, these liar for hire peer review doctors will often equate normal laboratory findings or diagnostic studies as evidence that there is no impairment. Well, you don't expect to see positive laboratory or diagnostic findings in cases of ME/CFS. These medical conditions generally are not established through objective medical evidence, such as diagnostic studies or testing. I mean, just think about it. Is there a test that will prove that you have a migraine? Well, if you have a brain CT scan and there's a tumor, then that may be the basis for the reason for the migraine. But that is an example of another medical condition where there are either no lab findings or unremarkable diagnostic studies. That doesn't negate the diagnosis of migraines, much less the diagnosis of ME/CFS. So think about that argument in relationship to perhaps a migraine claim. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't prevent them from hanging their hat on that to justify claims denial. Reason number 6 is there's medical improvement. So on the flip side of this, the medical reviewer will comment that recent office notes reflect overall improvement. And then they'll jump to the conclusion, 1, that there's improvement, and 2, that that level of improvement allows you to work. But what is improvement? And is that improvement temporary or is it permanent? Is it enough to permit you to return to work? Of course, the peer review provider never considers or answers those questions. Denial reason number 7 is that the level of care isn't enough. Is your head spinning yet? The medical reviewer will often comment that the lack of escalating care or medication is inconsistent with a level of reported impairment, pain, or fatigue. And as a result, you magically are capable of working. Now, of course, the peer review provider hasn't commented on the care that you've gotten and your lack of improvement as a result of that care. Nonetheless, they are going to criticize the level of care and use that as a reason to deny your claim. Denial reason number 8, there are no side effects from medication, and therefore you ought to be able to work. Now, that, of course, is not always true. Medications like Benadryl, Zoloft, lorazepam, Adderall, Lyrica, a whole stable of medications are used in ME/CFS cases, and they have reported side effects. Now, what the peer review provider will do is scour the medical records looking for medication side effects. And if they don't find any, they're going to opine that there are no medication side effects. Now, that may not always be true. And quite frankly, the doctor probably told you when they prescribed the medication that there would be side effects. And so you're not necessarily going to report to the doctor anything abnormal because the doctor told you that you would normally have those kinds of problems. Yet, because there's no medication side effects noted in the records, the peer review doctor is then going to say, well, since there are no medication side effects noted, that can't impact the person's ability to work, and therefore they can work because they're getting a good result. Or if there are medication side effects, they'll say, well, they don't rise to the level of impairment warranting any restrictions, limitations. In other words, they're playing both sides of this game. What's important here is that that's not the standard of disability, and they will purposely fail to address the known side effects caused by combinations of medications, much less the medications that are being prescribed. So that's another common reason for denial. Now, let's take a quick break before we head into our next section. And while we do that, think about those 8 reasons. Has your claim been denied because of any of those 8 reasons?